all for being here. I know it is daylight savings time, so we still have a little bit of sunlight out there. The sun will go down over this next hour, so let's just dive in. This is the Ditching Diets webinar, and I think it's a great time to do this webinar, not only because it's March and we're 3 months into 2021, but we're also a full year into our new world of COVID life. So I've seen it a lot in my practice, lots of people experiencing this type of, changes in our world in a variety of different ways, including being at home all the time, having access to food, feeling like there's some weight gain. Overall, I would say there has been just a variety of different types of reactions to COVID, including the food relationship. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. Before we do, a little bit about myself. So this is me. I'm a naturopathic doctor. I think I know most of you, which is great. Most of you know that I own Verger Wellness Clinic. We're in Uptown Waterloo, and that my practice is quite evidence-based. So I love to use nutrition as part of my practice, and I actually practice something called orthomolecular nutrition, which is looking at the health status and the influence of nutrition on different health syndromes, diseases, conditions, health states, etc. So that's me. I am offering virtual care and in-person care through COVID to Ontario residents only, and I love to treat gut health and hormonal health. I think most of you know that already. Specifically, these conditions that I've listed here. So when I talk about gut health, I'm including a variety of different conditions there, not just IBS. And when we talk about hormones, we're not just talking about menstrual complaints, we're talking about diabetes and thyroid and adrenal health. So the whole hormonal picture. Verger Wellness Clinic. So our team is actually made up of 3 nutritionists. So I'm not sure if everyone knew that, but just kind of tells you the emphasis that we place on nutrition at Verger. We really believe nutrition is the foundation of health. What we put in our body every single day is really important. And so I work with 3 awesome nutritionists who help our patients take the information and the strategy that I have put in place and really break that down into practical information for them, bite-sized chunks, if you will. Our nutrition team is also award-winning, so we've won a few of the Reader's Choice Awards in 2020, and our nutrition team also won a Reader's Choice Award in 2019, which was our first year of operation as Verger Wellness Clinic. So I'm very proud of the nutrition team, and we're very good at what we do, and I think people have said that to us through these awards, which is cool. All right, so ditching diets. We are going to talk about the definition of diet. It is such a hot word. And it can invoke a lot of emotions. So we're going to talk more about diet. We're going to talk about diet culture. We're going to talk about the medicinal and therapeutic use of diet. We're going to talk about metabolism and what metabolism is and what influences metabolism. And then we're going to debunk some popular diets. And lastly, we're going to talk about intuitive eating. All right, so what does the word diet mean to you? Does that invoke any sort of feelings? Are there any emotions that come up? Do you have any attachments to that word? If you're comfortable, I invite you to share in the chat. You can definitely pop in, some information for us if you're comfortable. Diet, it's funny, I was chatting with a friend and we were talking about, diet culture, and it was right after New Year's, so the diet culture push was very, very high at that time, and I just think this word has a lot behind it. So let's look at the actual definition of this word. Diet means the kinds of food that a person consumes. So that's the way that I use this word. So when we look at this definition, there's really a dichotomy that's happening here. You can see number 1, the first use of this word is the kind and variety of food that a person continually and habitually consumes, right? So that is diet. Diet also has a secondary meaning where someone is put on a special course of food intake in order to restrict or for the purpose of weight loss or for medical reasons. So right off the bat, we can see this dichotomy that's developed, and this is the type of dichotomy that I feel is at play all the time. I have patients that come in and say, I've tried a diet. I don't want to change my diet, or I want to change my diet. I want to go on a diet. It's diet where when I speak about diet, I am using it in the sense of the food that someone consumes, not strictly for the purpose of weight loss. And then, when we say we are going on a diet or we're dieting, using it as a verb, then it definitely, typically we would refer to that as for the purpose of weight loss. So it's just interesting that even the definition of this word already highlights that the purpose is to lose weight or to restrict oneself. That's got to say something. So what is diet culture? Obviously, this is the use of the word has actually been impacted by culture and society, right? And so diet culture is a system of beliefs that perpetuates the thinking that thin is healthy and that being overweight is not. And so this really is this, the concept of sizeism comes in here, where sizeism basically is a form of discrimination against somebody based on their body size. So that can be a large body size. That can also mean a small body size. Sizeism applies to both ends of the spectrum. And so, in medicine, we often will hear that, because you're overweight, you need to lose weight in order to be healthy. And that's not always the case, right? I know patients and there are people that may be overweight or categorized as overweight or obese based on their BMI, which is what medicine uses to determine someone's weight and if it is healthy or not. And yet these people have no markers for blood sugar imbalances, cholesterol levels are in check, their liver is working, their kidneys are functioning. So we have to just get rid of this idea that the size of the body indicates the health of the body. Yes, there are some trends, and certainly there are, on either end, there are problems, but overall, society needs to stop discriminating based purely on the size of the body. And so, this is an article that is from the National Eating Disorders Association, and it basically says that weight stigma is so entrenched in our culture that even healthcare professionals will actually substitute this fat phobia, so being afraid of fat people or fearing fat, obese people, for actual diagnosis or treatment. And I have seen this in practice. I'll give you a quick example. I've had a patient come in who was diagnosed with hypothyroidism, told that this patient needed to lose weight. And unfortunately, with hypothyroidism, the metabolism is in a state where it is very difficult to lose weight. She was already trying to lose weight by restricting herself to the point that she was not feeling good. And yet she was not actually given any treatment. She was just told you need to lose weight in order to deal with your cholesterol levels, which with hypothyroidism, a physician would know high cholesterol is very common in people that do have hypothyroidism. So to treat the thyroid appropriately would have helped to resolve the cholesterol issue without shaming this patient into needing to lose weight. It's just one example, but I see it all the time, especially in women, unfortunately, because women are much more prone to thyroid and hormonal menstrual complaints. Of course, men don't have a period. But anyway, yeah, this is real and it is a problem. So what happens when we diet? When we diet, so impacts of dieting, oftentimes there are these mental, emotional impacts where people feel tired, they feel irritable, they may not feel cognitively able to focus. There may be brain fog or fatigue. There can be weakness, depression, anxiety. So all of these mental emotional aspects and symptoms to dieting. You're putting somebody into a state where they are not getting enough food. Of course, they're going to feel irritable and angry and anxious and possibly even depressed. Additionally, oops, there we go. Diet also impacts metabolism. So metabolism really, like when you eat food, your body is turning that food into heat. That is thermogenesis that is happening. These are this is the principles of physics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can be transformed. So we are literally taking that food and turning it into heat. That is part of our metabolism. If we don't get enough food, we don't get enough heat. At a different level, hormonal level, dieting, so not caloric restriction, under eating, it can actually cause the cortisol levels to rise. And cortisol is your stress hormone level. So your body interprets that starvation or that lack of calories as starvation, and it increases its stress hormone. And that's a self-preservation mechanism. Your body is trying to save itself. It doesn't know when its next meal might be coming, when it's not getting enough food regularly. So that can be enough overall food, or it can be when there's too much fasting or too long of a window between meals. We can still see this stress response happening. And when cortisol levels are high, that can impact the blood sugar and cholesterol level. And those two things combined are a perfect recipe for weight gain. And you know, in a person who is actually trying to lose weight with their diet specifically. Dieting also slows down thyroid metabolism. So specifically, it starts to take T4 and convert into reverse T3, which is basically an inactive, useless form of T3, which normal T3 is your thyroid hormone, your active, biologically active thyroid hormone. Reverse T3 is inactive. So under stress and under dieting conditions, your thyroid will actually slow, which is not helpful for metabolism. Oops. We also can see changes when dieting, so caloric restriction, under eating goes on for a long enough time. We can see problems with fertility and with bone mass. And that's because there are hormonal cascades that start to happen where, especially hormones like estrogen and progesterone, which help to preserve the density of bones, declines when there's not enough body fat on a female body. We can see the impact, so dieting impacting hormones, but also the adrenal system. And I kind of talked about those mechanisms of action. Metabolism in general, it's multifactorial. So we've talked briefly about the thyroid. The thyroid is your master metabolism gland. It sits in the throat and it secretes T3 and T4. So these hormones, T3 and T4, float around in your bloodstream and they convert into T3, which is the active form of the hormone. And so T3 is helping to control things like blood sugar levels and muscle and fat tissue levels. So and bone density. So we need to have a healthy thyroid in order to have a healthy metabolism. Also, insulin resistance. I see this in a lot of patients that have been diagnosed with PCOS or even something along the lines of a PCOS diagnosis. Insulin resistance basically makes it very hard for the blood sugars to have an effect in the cells. And so we end up actually craving more sugars when insulin resistance is there. And that's because the body is basically in a starvation state. The cells are in a starvation state when there is insulin resistance because that blood sugar can't get into the cell through the insulin mechanism. And so, typically in insulin resistant patients, there's a lot of fat tissue development that occurs, which is hormonally active, secreting more insulin. So it can be a pretty difficult cycle. Also, metabolism is influenced by genetics. So there are single nucleotide polymorphisms, which is what SNP stands for. And those SNPs You can test this on your 23andMe testing. So if you've had that done, then you can look through your data and get some really cool information. Some people are prone to developing diabetes. Some people are prone to actually having their hunger and satiety signals not regulate as effectively. Some people are prone to having a microbiome which can actually which predisposes them to obesity and insulin resistance. So there is a genetic component to this, not only from the metabolism aspect, but of course, if there's a family history of thyroid conditions, if there's a family history of diabetes type 2, then we have lots of genetic factors that are helping to determine metabolism. Liver function, so how well or how poorly your liver is breaking down and processing substances, that influences metabolism. Muscle mass is one that influences metabolism. Muscles utilize a lot more fuel to maintain their structure than fat tissue does. So muscles need more energy in order to function. So when I work with patients, I'll often tell them, focus on weightlifting and resistance exercise. Stop worrying about the hardcore cardio. That's not doing anything to help your metabolism. And if anything, it could actually be stressing the adrenal glands more than what we would want. And lastly, environmental toxicity. That is a newer area of medicine that is looking at how environmental toxins, things that are found in plastics or, pesticides, solvents that people might be exposed to, this all influences your metabolism. And so obesegens are kind of what this category of chemicals and substances is called. Obesegens are found in the environment and they are known to have an impact on human metabolism. They're commonly found in household items. A lot of baby products, unfortunately, have these flame retardants and other sort of like plastics with BPA in these products, which we're giving to very, very little bodies, but it's also lifelong exposure that can be a problem as well. Cookware, so things like your non-stick Teflon pan, that's not great. That is a source of toxicity. Cosmetics, so makeup and perfumes and all of these products that people put on are they can be quite detrimental as well. And when your body has a high toxic burden, it deals with that by actually putting the toxins into fat storage. So it tucks them away in the fat tissue and to try to save, again, it's a self-preservation mechanism. So in some patients where we're seeing this resistance to weight loss, where, it's not coming easily, and they may have a high toxic burden, once we do a questionnaire, which I'll show you in a moment, we actually work on detoxifying in order to help them get to their goal. So this is a questionnaire that I use in practice. It's the Metabolic Detox Questionnaire. We're going to send this out to you guys after the webinar is done, so everyone will get a copy of it. Feel free to fill this out. It is not a diagnostic tool, but it is really cool to see how you're scoring, what your level of symptoms and signs are associated with a toxic burden. So feel free to fill that out and see where you're at right now. And if you do happen to score high, definitely, over 50 is something where we would start to take action with this questionnaire. So if you're scoring over 50, I encourage you, contact us at the clinic. Holly and Taryn have a freebie appointment set up to actually talk to people about this questionnaire and what it may mean. So feel free to use that resource if you'd like to. It's going to be coming out after the webinar is over. Body positivity. So kind of switching gears here. Body positivity is a social movement that respects all body sizes, abilities, genders, races, and appearances. This is sort of a newer trend, I would say. It is a movement, and I think it's a great movement because it is all about accepting people where they're at, which is going to be a theme through this webinar that we're doing. Body positivity really grew out of this movement of acceptance of overweight individuals and challenging the societal norms. You may think back to some of the commercials that you maybe saw a while ago, put out by Dove, right? Really, they were sort of in the advertising sphere, one of the first companies that started to change up and challenge the norm of what we would see as a woman in advertising. So definitely things are changing now, and I think that's really cool. And I think it's really important that we are accepting of all bodies at any size and all gender and all abilities. We just have to be accepting of everybody. That's body positivity. So how do we eat for our metabolism? Well, there's many theories, right? So I'm just going to kind of go over what's important. The basics. I'm not going to be able to tell you how to eat best for your metabolism through a webinar, but let's talk about what is important to know. So carbs are the fastest burning fuel source. That means that your body utilizes them and burns them very quickly. That is helpful in some situations where we need a quick hit of energy, but that does not necessarily give us sustained energy and does not necessarily promote a very active metabolism. It's quick energy, and then it sort of peaks and valleys and drops off. Whereas proteins are a slower burning fuel source. Proteins can turn into carbohydrates. And this is where I see some patients that are, trying to go to a lower carb option, or maybe some of my patients are trying keto, and they're really restricting their proteins and their carbs. If the protein amount is too high, we may actually get conversion into carbohydrates through a process called gluconeogenesis. And so whether or not you want that can be good or bad. Fats are a very slow burning fuel. Fats do not convert into carbs. You just use fats through a process called beta oxidation. So it's a very different form of metabolism than cellular respiration and carbohydrate burning, as well as protein burning. So we want to get a balance of all of these things at each and every time we eat. We want to have a little bit of that fast blood sugar rush so that we get enough energy from our food quickly, but we need to have a longer lasting blood sugar level, and we get that from proteins and fats so that we don't feel hungry 1 hour after eating and our insulin doesn't spike and then fall. The way we time our food is also kind of up for debate, what may or may not be best. So you've probably heard people say, eat more often and smaller meals throughout the day, and that's how the French do it. Or maybe you've heard people say that you need to stop eating and stop snacking in between meals and only eat 3 meals a day, and that's the best for metabolism, is going through those 4-hour windows without any food. There's really no right answer here. So I will often take into account the patient's situation when we are determining what is the best option about the timing of how to eat. And sometimes we use fasting, and then sometimes we don't. So it really depends on the person. But both of those, fasting and then frequent eating, both have been said to improve metabolism. The jury's out. So long story short, nutrition must be individualized. There is no one size fits all when it comes to metabolism. There are so many individual influences on metabolism. It's really hard to say without having more information, what is the best way to eat for overall metabolism for one person. So food is medicine. Obviously, as a naturopath, I really believe that food is our medicine, and that what we put in our body greatly impacts our health. Hippocrates, father of medicine from many, many years ago, said, "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food." This is not a new concept of using food and the way we eat, our diet, our dietary intake. That is not a new idea to use it medicinally or to have some advantage. However, given all of that, a 2015 study tells us that 71% of American medical schools fail to meet the very basic minimum amount of 25 hours of nutrition education in their medical curriculum, which is just abysmal, if you ask me. And as a naturopath, we get 3.5 years. So despite the fact that we are saying food is medicine and that what we put in our body is so influential on our health, um, American doctors are not getting even 25 hours of education on this topic, which you just can't cover enough in 25 hours. So naturopaths, I think this is where we get to step into our light and, really have a strong focus on nutrition. It's a 3.5 year nutrition program with exams and casework and assignments and research projects, everything you would expect it to be in a professional program, but lots and lots of focus on nutrition, obviously. And knowing that also, chronic disease, and so when we say chronic diseases, we are talking about things like diabetes and cardiovascular disease and cancer, and degenerative diseases like dementia and Alzheimer's. These diseases account for 30% of direct health costs. That is a lot of money of our health budget that is going to chronic disease, especially knowing that chronic disease is modifiable by lifestyle and nutrition. And so, what's accounting for this massive amount of chronic disease spending? Aging population. We've got higher rates than ever of obesity, and we've got more than ever before a population that engages in sedentary lifestyle behaviors. So sitting at a desk, working, sitting in front of a computer, working, not going out for walks, not engaging in just even simple activities of daily movement. So these are some of the reasons why we're seeing that big uptick. I also think there's an amount of nutrition guidance that needs to be, we need to do better in the medical community with our nutrition guidance. That needs to be part of the education system and part of the medical education system. So just a little bit about chronic disease. So this is an interesting diagram for you to look at, but you can see on the right side, we've got the Western diet. On the left side, we've got the Mediterranean diet. The Western diet is notoriously very high, as the triangle indicates. The top of the triangle is takeout and meats and processed foods and treats. There's a cupcake there. Whereas in the Mediterranean diet, that top portion is very, very small. And at the base of the Mediterranean diet, we have tons of fruits and vegetables. So this tells us about the quantities of the foods in a Western diet versus a Mediterranean diet. And it also tells us about this sort of rising level of chronic disease and also how the microbiome influences this. And so I put this in here because I love the microbiome and gut health. And I think it's important that you know that the less refined the diet is, the better the microbiome health is. So the more fruits and vegetables, the more whole grains and beans and legumes and whole foods that we can get in our diet, the better our microbiome health is. And so I believe the microbiome is very influential on many, many different conditions and inflammation in the body. So just drop that little bit in there for you. So what should we eat, right? We're trying to figure this all out. Well, Canada's Food Guide tells us this. It really tells us that, so the Food Guide was updated in 2019. They did a good job of updating. I think it was much better than their last version of the Food Guide. And the Food Guide is updated by dietitians, right? So these are regulated health professionals that are really telling us from the research what the average Canadian diet should look like. You can see here there is absolutely more plants on this plate than there ever used to be, more whole foods, right? Not only that, but they've swapped out the old, 5 to 7, 7 to 10 serving sizes. servings of carbohydrates a day, or 5 to 7 servings of proteins and alternatives a day. Now we're seeing more so a portion size on a plate, which I think is helpful. There is less emphasis on carbohydrate consumption, which is a very good revision in my opinion. And there is also more focus on getting adequate protein, as well as a variety of types of proteins, not just all coming from animal sources, which is also good. I have done a full review of the food guide that is available on my blog. So I am going to send that out in our follow-up email with a link that works to the blog. And you guys can check out my review of the food guide if you'd like to learn a little bit more about what I really think about it. But overall, I think it's good. And generally speaking, this is a good recommendation for most Canadians. So when I am determining what patients should eat, we're coming back to looking at this individualized approach, this orthomolecular approach, where we are looking at the health status of the individual, plus gathering as much information as we can to know what type of food and how much food and the timing of the food. All of that is influenced by some objective information that I like to gather. So when I'm making recommendations, I will talk about, the macronutrients or even the micronutrient needs. So that might be how much protein someone should be aiming for, or how much calcium we should be aiming for. We look at the possibility of nutrient deficiencies, so assessing signs and symptoms of any frank nutrient deficiencies. I will do diet counseling, so that's where I will actually help patients understand what types of foods they should be eating, and more so, how to eat, the eating environment. And I will also use therapeutic diets. I personally don't do meal planning, and that is where I like to refer to the nutritionists, because they are really good at that. And they have a lot of resources available to help patients put together a plan that is specific for them. So I like to kind of give the strategy behind the type of diet, and then have the nutritionist really put it into practice when patients need that extra step. I will take a dietary intake. So I'm always asking patients what they're eating, where they're eating, how they're eating, what do they like to eat, if there are any cultural or religious considerations that we want to make here, how the appetite is, right? If someone is expected to eat 3 meals a day, but they only feel hungry for one, do we need that person eating 3 meals a day? We talk about that. Cravings for foods and what they mean, what those sugar cravings mean, and what the salty cravings mean. Any digestive symptoms that accompany eating, right? If there's ongoing bloating, if there is diarrhea after eating greasy food, and of course the emotional component. That is something that really, it does take time to kind of get that rapport with patients where we can be comfortable to talk about the food history and the relationship with food, but it is part of the process. It is really important to factor that in. So some therapeutic diets that I like to use in my practice: low FODMAP diet, gluten-free diet, the DASH diet for high blood pressure, low histamine diet for allergies, the Mediterranean diet, and the elimination diet. These diets all have a lot of evidence behind them, and are so pretty research based. I would say overall with nutrition, evidence is lacking. There's just not as much evidence as we would hope for when we're looking at nutrition and diets. But we've got some good evidence for these diets. There are other diets, right? So I just kind of listed out a bunch of popular diets that people have probably heard of. Some of these diets are the traditional use of the word, where we're talking about the dietary intake, the variety and the types of foods. And some of these diets are strictly for the purpose of weight loss, right? Weight Watchers, it's a point-based system where you have to stay within your points, but really it doesn't matter what type of food it is as long as you're in your points. That's one way. Slim Fast, which is like a shake-based weight loss program. There are all kinds of programs out there. I'm sure I didn't even list, 50% of them, because something new is popping up every day. but I tried to highlight a few of the most popular ones. And then we are going to go through these four. So intermittent fasting, keto, vegan, and gluten-free. And we're going to talk about what they are and then the pros and cons of each. So intermittent fasting, this is a diet. This is a type of dietary intake that is all about the timing of the food, not necessarily the type of the food. So this is where we actually use fasting, so a period where there is no food, as the intervention. And so that can be a 12-hour window, that can be a 14-hour window, could be a 16-hour window, could be a full 24 hours, right? There's some research, and I use all of these in clinical practice. So it's really more so about the timing. It does limit the snacking between meals. But when you are eating, when you're at mealtime, when you're in your 12 hours of feeding, the type of food doesn't matter so much. That's what the research says anyway. And so this is a diet that doesn't necessarily, it's not all about cutting calories, and it's not all about losing weight. Intermittent fasting has been shown to be a powerful inductor of a process called autophagy. And autophagy is where your cells can actually clean up the debris, so to speak, and repair themselves. And that process is critical for cancer prevention. So really cool impact of actually fasting is seeing this cellular process upregulated. Usually with the intermittent fasting, it's not meant to decrease calories, but because there is a restriction on the window of time for eating, it does typically translate to a lower intake, although that is not the focus with this diet. So the pros, there is a good level of evidence of this diet. There are numerous animal studies and human clinical trials, and studies have shown significant improvements in insulin levels and weight loss. It also has shown these increases in human growth hormone, so helping to repair through regeneration through an overnight fast, and then cellular repair and gene expression. So really cool at a microscopic level, really helpful with intermittent fasting. The cons of intermittent fasting is that it's very challenging. When people get started, they feel hungry, and they're maybe not used to going 16 hours without eating or a full 24 hours without eating. And so that process can be difficult for some to work through. And also, this diet is not suitable for all. With intermittent fasting, if there is a history of disordered eating or eating disorders, I would not feel comfortable recommending, or even, I wouldn't recommend intermittent fasting if there is that history, because it can be a trigger for some people with food restriction. And obviously we would want to avoid that if there is that history. Not only that, but if there's diabetes type 1 or insulin dependent diabetes type 2 with insulin dependence, this is not necessarily the diet for these people either, because you're going through a period without food, and we would need to be very cautious of monitoring the insulin dosage to ensure there's no hypoglycemia that occurs. So generally, I think this is a good diet, but it is not for everybody. The keto diet. So again, this is a diet that has originally been studied for a different purpose. So it was originally, started as a treatment, a dietary intervention for epilepsy. And so it's kind of transformed. Nowadays, you can probably see information about keto on the internet and how keto helped, people lose a lot of weight. I think it's being used for a number of reasons. And part of the reason I think people have success if they're trying to lose weight on a keto diet, purely because they're just cutting out the carbs, right? That standard American diet is very high in processed foods. When we remove those high processed refined carbs like breads and bagels and pasta and crackers, when we remove those, we remove a lot of these empty calories that, it's all glucose, it's all carbohydrate, there's no protein to balance the blood sugars. People tend to lose weight just simply because of that, I believe. So the keto diet, just to kind of back up, it's a high fat, moderate protein, and very low carb diet. And so these ratios, I get very specific with some people when I'm helping them with the keto diet, to find their right balance of fats and carbs and proteins. The ketone portion is, so your body is making ketones. When you are using fat as your fuel source, your body burns these fats and creates ketones through beta oxidation. That's what the process is called. And this is okay. There's, again, if you go reading about the keto diet, you might hear that it's not a safe diet. And certainly I don't recommend starting without speaking to a healthcare practitioner. But the type of ketogenic, the type of ketones that we're talking about are not necessarily the same kind of ketones that we would see in someone who is diabetic and is dealing with metabolic acidosis, which is a different, more emergency situation. So generally, these ketones are used as fuel for your brain, for your muscles, and it's generally okay. This diet has been shown to be quite helpful for weight loss, if that's the goal of the diet. It's not always the goal of this diet, right? If we're trying to use it to control epilepsy, so seizure conditions, or if we're trying to use this diet to help manage diabetes type 2, insulin resistance in the context of PCOS, blood sugar control, and helping with weight loss, this can be a great option. The cons of this diet, so dirty keto, I put in quotations. Dirty keto, you've maybe heard of it before. It's basically people eating foods that are high fat, but not necessarily high nutrient value. So there can be dependence on bacon and hamburgers and, foods that are not necessarily the most nutritious. They do have a high fat content, so they do fit the bill for a keto diet, but they're not providing any other value besides their fat content. And so obviously that's not good. We can run into problems there. Keto flu, again, I don't know if anyone's experienced that. If anyone's tried keto and has experienced a keto flu, let us know, because I'm sure it was not pleasant. But basically, this is like a 2 to 3 week process where people feel awful, and it's their body transitioning from carbohydrate metabolism into fat burning metabolism. And there can be chills and fevers and headaches, joint pain. You can feel quite flu-like. Just because your body is changing the way it burns resources from carbs to fats. The keto diet, I also believe, does not have enough dietary fiber. So being a gut health person, I'm always thinking about fiber, resistant starches, and making sure we're getting enough fiber to feed the microbiome and to keep the colon healthy. And with a keto diet, you're eating a lot of fats. It's a lot of fats, not necessarily out of carbs, and where you get your fiber is along with your carbs. So I believe that there can be problems with the microbiome that do occur on a keto diet long term. We're talking about not just 6 months of a keto intervention. We can start to see some changes when there's just only fats in the diet. Safety. So again, I don't think this is safe for everybody, and I certainly wouldn't recommend it for everybody. And so we've kind of talked about some of those conditions: diabetes type 1, people that do have a history of disordered eating, even in patients that are dealing with adrenal fatigue or hormonal conditions, or fertility. This may not be the diet for them, right? It is a very restrictive diet. It does really restrict the types of foods, and it makes it difficult to eat with friends and family and to go to restaurants. So is that a good thing? I'm not sure. The next diet is the vegan diet. Oops, we missed a slide. There we go. So the vegan diet is plant matter only, and plant byproducts only, right? So anything that comes from an animal or is an animal tissue is eliminated from this diet. And so there's a difference between vegan and vegetarian. Vegetarian will typically include things like eggs and yogurt and cheese, whereas vegan would not. So because it is a byproduct of an animal, it's out of a vegan diet. A lot of people will start to consume a vegan diet for ethical reasons, right? For animal safety and fair treatment of animals. Other people may start a vegan diet from an environmental perspective to help lower the greenhouse gas consumption that they're contributing to. With the vegan diet, as with some other diets, but especially with the vegan diet, there is almost a sense of self-identity, because veganism will also not always, but can sort of permeate into the lifestyle, right? There are vegan leather purses, there are vegan leather chairs. So it starts to become not only about food, but also about the impact in one's whole life with veganism. And we don't see that with all diets, right? We don't see a keto couch, but with veganism, it's a little different. So with the vegan diet, is a really well-researched diet. There are a lot of significant studies on longevity and reduced all-cause mortality. So that means any cause of death is lowered with this type of plant-based diet compared to a non-plant-based diet. And so, yeah, it's got a lot of evidence. It's a high fiber diet. It's packed full of antioxidants. And this is when it's done properly. When people are eating a variety of fruits and vegetables and grains and legumes. The environmental impact, I put a question mark there just because, there are some of the main crops that vegans do rely on would be soy. So soy is a major crop used in tempeh and tofu and edamame beans. It's a great protein source. It has got a good calcium content. But soy is also one of the most genetically modified plants in agriculture, and it is also one of the most heavily sprayed with pesticides plants in agriculture. So, if we're thinking about the environment, how are those things influencing the environment? I leave that as a question to you. And my recommendation there would be, whenever you have the opportunity to buy organic, non-GMO, soy-based products, whenever possible, because it's better for your health. The cons of this diet, I do see a lot of nutrient deficiencies develop. So not just in your typical things like B12 and iron, but in other nutrients such as calcium, such as B6, zinc and copper, and omega-3s. So it is, we're relying on plants for a lot of our food sources, and our B6, our copper, our zinc, our B12, our iron. We do get a lot of that from animal tissue. And omega-3s, not everybody actually has the genetic ability to convert omega-6 into omega-3. So we may not be getting enough omega-3 in that person's body because of their plant-based diet and their genetics, right? So we would end up seeing some signs and symptoms of that. And then another con of this diet is that it is restrictive. I would say now more than ever before, there are many, many vegan options on the marketplace, which is great. But this still is restricting a food category or a few food categories. Gluten-free diet. So kind of becoming more popular nowadays, I would say. It's popularized over the last few years. Gluten is a protein found in grains. It really makes the grains nice and sticky. So it keeps it's a protein in the breads that helps to create a nice fluffy loaf of bread that has got some good sponge to it. So that's wheat, spelt, rye, barley, malt, whole wheat, white wheat, sprouted wheat, whatever kind of wheat it is, it has gluten in it. There are non-gluten containing grains such as quinoa and rice and amaranth, millet, sef, sorghum, corn, I think teff, not sef, and oat. I put a question mark there just because oat, there's a lot of cross-contamination. So oat is a food that if you do have celiac disease, you want to be sure you're getting a gluten-free oat. If you don't have celiac disease, you don't necessarily need a gluten-free oat. You might get a small amount of gluten in your oats just because of the cross-contamination through the farming processes. And yeah, and gluten is inflammatory. So it inflames the blood-brain barrier. It is inflammatory to the gut membrane. It can be inflammatory where people feel it as joint pain and brain fog and fatigue. So it is an inflammatory protein. It's the pros of a gluten-free diet. So it is beneficial for some people. It is not beneficial for everybody. Not everybody needs to be gluten-free. And certainly in my naturopathic practice, I don't recommend everybody is gluten-free. And certain conditions, we may need to go gluten-free for a period of time, but it's not necessarily indicated for everybody. And there is research that is targeted, especially with celiac disease and inflammatory bowel disease, a gluten-free diet. There's not a lot of research about a gluten-free diet overall, but there is some. And overall, I think it's good because it leads to less bread consumption in that standard American diet. So gluten-free products are not always healthier. So this is a con. Just because it's gluten-free does not necessarily mean that it is a healthier option. And so I think that's a bit of a marketing scheme that's going on these days where people are just calling something gluten-free and slapping that on there to make people think it's healthy. That's not the case. There's often a lot of additives. There can be filling agents, xanthan gum, and random ingredients that are thrown in there. A lot of sugar is added in to try and create a flavor. So that it doesn't mean healthier. Gluten-free does not mean healthier. There can be nutrient deficiencies that develop in some people because bread is fortified. So your typical white bread, whole wheat breads, these are fortified breads. So when people take away that source of fortification by going gluten-free, they may actually become riboflavin and thiamine deficient. So those are two key B vitamins that are fortified in breads. And again, it's restrictive. So, we've across the board, all of these diets are restrictive. It is not, there is not one option here that is not restrictive. So what should we eat? We still don't really have an answer on that one, right? Well, basically, my key takeaways for you are that eat more fiber, more than 30 grams a day. The recommended daily intake for diet intake from the Dietitians of Canada is 25 grams a day. I recommend 30 just because I don't think 25 is enough. And often I see people not even reaching their 25 grams. Overall, eat less sugar. We as a society are eating too much sugar. We need to be eating, again, a recommended dietary allowance of 25 grams or less of sugar. We need to eat more fruits and vegetables. So you can really see on that Canada's Food Guide, that image, just going back there, you can see half the plate is fruits and vegetables, right? Only a quarter of the plate is a protein category and the other quarter is your starches. So we need to up the fruits and veggies. We need to actually be getting closer to 7 to 10 servings per day of fruits and vegetables, with more emphasis on vegetables, less fruits. Overall, I think people should be eating a vegetarian or a vegan plant-based diet with small amounts of meats, fish, and seafood. That is what I believe to be the best type of diet. I think we, again, as a society, eat way too much meat. These are generalizations. Overall, there is way too much meat consumption and not nearly enough legume and whole grain consumption. So eating more things like chickpeas and kidney beans and black beans and lentils, eating quinoa and brown rice, eating millet, right? Trying a variety of different grains and legumes to get your protein sources, and then having small amounts of, high quality meat and high quality fish throughout the week. That is what I believe. And that kind of follows the Mediterranean diet as well. So the Mediterranean diet has a lot of research backing it for longevity, anti-cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, metabolic, syndrome. So there is a lot of information backing that diet as a strong diet. And it does rely a lot. You remember that pyramid picture with the Mediterranean diet? I'll just go back to it. That Mediterranean diet has the base is fruit and vegetables. Above that, you've got your whole grains, your starchy foods, and then above that, we've got some proteins and some plant sourced proteins with dairy and fish there. So, it's I think the Mediterranean diet is a really great option for people if they're wanting to choose a specific pattern. That is a good pattern. Eat whole foods that are locally grown and organic whenever you possibly can. I believe that is very important because you're going to get food that is fresh. You're going to get food that is seasonal to you. So you're helping the environment, but you're also helping yourself by getting foods that haven't been sitting on a truck, that have been shipped from Costa Rica or from overseas. Even some of the fruits and vegetables that people might buy might be from China, and so they've been sitting for a long time. The nutrient value degrades, so eat as locally and as seasonally as you possibly can, and eat whole foods in their whole form. And so I talked about eating seasonally. That's important. So when we get more fresh fruits and vegetables to become available, eat more of those. When we're dealing with more of the cruciferous vegetables, the broccoli, cauliflower, the cabbage, potatoes, parsnips, beets, eat those when they're in season. You want to be changing up the variety of foods that you're eating. There are many influences on diet. So again, when we're thinking about what should I be eating, we have to factor in that there are many, many influences on that dietary intake. They could be religious, so whether or not someone eats pork or beef because of a religion. Environmental factors, cultural factors, such as typically, the hotter the climate, the hotter the dish. And that's a safety mechanism to help ward off any parasites and bacteria infections with hot pepper, capsaicin, things that can actually kill some of those microbes. Cult preferences, right? So the type of food that we like to eat, or maybe, we don't want to eat a late dinner. All of those preferences are an impact on your diet. Societal norms as well, so kind of where you're at with that. And then ethical choices. There's many impacts on, there's many influences on the type of food that you should be eating. Not only that, but your age can influence the type of food that you might be eating. And age influences things because as we age, our taste receptor sensation declines. So our physical ability to taste foods and different flavors decreases as we age. Not only that, but we also get reduced salivary flow and reduced stomach acid secretion. So the ability to break down starches and beans can decline with age. Not only that, but metabolism slows. So as we age, generally our thyroid function slows down slightly. We want to make sure that that's still normal, but there is a bit of a slowing that occurs with age. And so we may find that the appetite decreases as a result of that. So that's an influence. And then there are risk factors for different diseases that change as we age, and that can influence the type of food that we might be eating. So, as we age, there can be a greater risk of cardiovascular disease because the blood vessels, they tend to get a little bit narrower as time goes on and plaque builds up. And so maybe we want to be changing our diet to give some therapeutic benefit to help prevent cardiovascular related events in our elderly. Food for thought. So basically, different diets are indicated throughout life. That's kind of the take home here. So this brings us to the conversation of intuitive eating. So we've talked about pros and cons of a variety of different diets. We've talked about the fact that eating the food that you eat is your diet, and that there are many influences on what is the best type of diet for you. And so I want to invite you to start to tune into your body and think more intuitively about your food. And so intuitive eating is not a new term. This is a term that's been around for 30 years, and it was developed by two dietitians. I've linked down to the website there, and I do recommend you go take a look at that because it's lots of information. And they've got the book available as well for purchase, the two dietitians. Intuitive eating really connects intuition and the eating process. And this is really useful when we are dealing with emotional eating or when we want to support the food relationship. Eating is when you talk to somebody about food and their diet, it can get very heated, right? So people are very passionate about their nutrition, and so much so that there's protests and there's hot debates at the dinner table. Food is a very passionate area for people to talk about. And so intuitive eating, again, turning inwards and looking at what you need from your dietary intake. So these are the 10 principles of intuitive eating. And so number 1, reject diet mentality. This is where we are starting to actually reject that diet culture, and we're stopping the conversation by saying, I'm going on a diet. It's going to be 3 months and then I'll be done. And then I can go back to my eating. And, this yo-yoing of dieting, that mentality is not helping. And we talked about how dieting actually impacts the metabolism and is not favorable to metabolism. Second principle is honoring your hunger. So this is really actually acknowledging when you're hungry and when you are not. Right? And so tuning into those signals. Sometimes those signals don't work very well in some people. And so we need to really practice listening to our body and hearing when we're hungry or when we're full, or when we're not hungry or full. We're just satiated. Making peace with food. So this is, an important one for sure, especially if there is a history of emotional eating or using food as a coping mechanism. Using food and knowing that food is fuel and thinking about it in that terminology is helpful when we're making peace with food. I hear all the time patients saying, I was bad, I had a treat, or I couldn't do your diet that you gave me. I had so many bad days. And that kind of conversation where we're labeling food as good and food as bad is also not helpful, right? We want to think about this food as fuel and nutrient dense fuel that you're putting in your body to fill yourself up. And there is an opportunity for an emotional connection to food, but it is not the source of happiness, right? It can bring you happiness, but it's not the be all and end all of that process. So making peace with food, challenging the food police. So that is where we're, being very restrictive, making rules about the types of foods that we can and can't eat and what's good and what's bad. We want to try and stop that food policing. Discovering the satisfaction factor. So really learning to savor your food is important. I talk to patients about the speed at which they eat. When we're rushed and we're not actually enjoying that food, we're not savoring the flavors, we're not getting that full satisfaction. And so really we're not getting the full value of our meal. So learning to slow down, to savor the flavors, taste all of the textures, smell the food, chew the food thoroughly. All of this helps to create a healthy relationship with food. Feeling your fullness. Now that is when we are feeling a healthy, comfortable level of fullness and being okay with it, right? This is not, sometimes people will eat so quickly, there will be a big load of food that comes into the stomach and then boom, they're so full. We want to eat at a rate where we can actually start to feel that fullness, and we're giving our body enough time to send the feedback up to the brain that there is these fullness signaling, like leptin and ghrelin levels are changing so that you're actually getting your fullness, your satiety signals. And that takes time. So if you eat too quickly, you're not going to be able to get that signaling, which contributes to the overeating problem. And also being comfortable to feel full, right? Some people, they don't necessarily they're not okay with feeling full. They would rather feel empty. And so that's worth investigating. Is it a self-worth issue where, that person doesn't feel that they're worthy of eating food and feeling full and nourishing their body? That's got to be, we got to dive deeper there. Using food to cope with your emotions, coping with your emotions with kindness and not using food. So being kind to yourself when you're feeling stressed or anxious or sad, not leaning to food as that hit of dopamine. We know that sugar, especially, causes a dopamine surge. So sugar is very much an addictive reward cycle that can occur with sugar consumption. And so for some people, when there is low mood, depression, that sugar piece can really help to be a mood lift. I would challenge, is that the only thing that we can use to help improve the mood? Probably not. Is that a healthy relationship with food? Probably not, right? We want that food to fill us up, to nourish us. We don't necessarily want that food to be, there's more that we have to do to address this mental component, the mental health component. Respecting your body. So that kind of ties back to body positivity, being body positive with yourself, right? And respecting where you're at in your current body is so important. There's patients that I work with where it's never good enough, right? We're always searching to try and get those pounds down. And, my question comes back, what's the purpose of this weight loss? Why are we trying to achieve this goal? What does being there do for you? Right? We need to learn to respect our body through the process of life, of all of the different stages of life, and whether or not we are focusing on weight loss for a therapeutic purpose or not, right? We need to be kind to our bodies. Movement. So using movement and how it impacts the digestive system and how it can allow you to feel your food more thoroughly. And then lastly, honoring your health with gentle nutrition. So this is where I think it's all about nourishing your body and using food as medicine, using food as therapeutically, and using food to fuel your body with the resources and the nutrients that it requires in order to function. And so sometimes we have to recognize that our diet, our current dietary pattern of eating, is not necessarily serving us on our health mission. And so that's where it is, I like to step in and help patients find the dietary strategy that helps them on their health mission and reach their health goals. So we're actually going to give you a handout that gives you more information about intuitive eating in the email that comes out to all of you. And so I'm just looking at the time. I know we're about an hour. We're a little overdue, so I'm just wrapping up now. There is no one size fits all. And I think we really highlighted that there are many influences on diet. And when we say diet, it is not a dirty word, right? We now know that, yes, there is diet culture, and that diet culture is influencing the way we think about the word diet. But the diet also has this other secondary use, which is where we are talking about the pattern of food intake, just simply the pattern of intake, not for the purpose of weight loss. So I challenge you to challenge your friends and family when you hear somebody using diet and you think, hey, that's all about weight loss. Challenge that definition. We have to start changing the conversation about using that word diet. There are many influences on diet, right? We talked about religious and cultural and medical rationale why we would maybe use or not use a specific dietary intervention. We may even need a variety of diets throughout our life. We talked about how with age, your metabolism and your stomach acid and your saliva may all change. So that can cause you to require different diets. Basically, there are pros and cons to many, many different types of diets. Is there a one size fits all? I don't believe so. I think it has to be individualized. And that's why I love what I do, because it is individualized medicine. And it's important that people start to develop a more intuitive sense of what their body really needs, right? If your body is asking for that piece of steak, then listen. If your body is asking for that salad with lots of fresh vegetables and lots of bright flavors, listen to that. If your body is not hungry, you got to listen to that. So tuning into the internal dialogue, and this is almost a meditative process, right? Where we can use mindfulness and mindfulness-based therapies to start to really tune into what's going on in the body and what your body is calling for. And I think the less that we ignore those signs, the better. So I think you're all already signed up for our email newsletters. I'll kind of leave it with you guys. If you have any questions, then feel free to put them in the chat, and I am happy to answer. I know we talked about a lot of different topics, so if there's any questions about anything, you guys can let me know. And if not, thank you for being here. I hope this was useful to you. I know it was a little bit of a mishmash of diet, the therapeutic use of diet, metabolism, and I hope you got what you were looking for out of this topic. I'm happy to answer other questions.